In his 1860 essay, Fate, Ralph Waldo Emerson powerfully shows the ways in which our lives are utterly determined, the ways in which any notion of freedom severely compromised. Our environment shapes who we are, our body types shape who we are, our genes shape who we are, the laws of science shape who we are. There's so many ways that we are fated that it doesn't make sense to talk about free will. Emerson spends the first part of the essay offering example after example after example, basically propounding a Darwinian view of existence, even though he'd not quite digested Origin of Species at that time, which had come out in 1859, a basically Darwin idea of existence where we are totally controlled by our environment, and if there is any change in our behaviors, it is due to random mutations. But then Emerson, in his characteristic way, he does this in Experience too, in the middle of the essay, shifts and pushes back hard against this idea that we are fated. Ultimately says we are fated to be free, meaning that, yes, we are pushed around by massive cosmic forces, but we have the ability through our wit and imagination to turn these powers to our own use. We can be thrown into the water and be threatened with drowning, yes, but we can also build a boat. In some ways, it's that simple. The example I like to give is life is like being pushed from a great cliff down to the ocean. The gravity will push you down into the water. There's nothing you can do about it, just as your life is constantly pushing you toward your own death. But you have choice over how you will fall. You can choose to fall gracefully, do a swan dive, or jackknife, say, or even something fancier, like gainer, flips. Or you can flail wildly and yell and do a belly flop. So the freedom for Emerson comes not in transcending the great forces of nature, but in using wit and imagination to turn these forces to human use. And of course, part of this turning would be the creation of art, technology. So I preface this lecture, which is actually on Hawthorne, with this quick nod to Emerson's Fate, to set up the idea that Hawthorne is not nearly as optimistic as Emerson concerning our overcoming of fate. Now, it's interesting to note that these two men lived at the same time in Concord, Massachusetts. Hawthorne was an aspiring writer. This was during the 40s. He just got married to Sophia Peabody. He was there in Concord trying to work on his short stories, was not then really drafting a novel. Well, the significant novels, Scarlet Letter or House of the Seven Gables, he'd written a really bad novel back when he was much younger called Fanshawe. But he's there, he's hanging out with Emerson, and he and Emerson, they like each other well enough as people, but they do not really admire each other's work. This is what Emerson writes about Hawthorne. He's in his journal. He says, Hawthorne's reputation as a writer is a very pleasing fact. He's happy that Hawthorne's doing well because he likes the man okay. But why is his reputation as a writer a pleasing fact? Because his writing is not good for anything. This is a tribute to the man. So Hawthorne's writing is nothing. It's insubstantial. It's no good to anyone for Emerson. So he doesn't admire Hawthorne as a writer, although he likes him well enough as a man. Well, what did Hawthorne have to say about Emerson? He said, Emerson is a great searcher after facts, but they seem to melt away and become unsubstantial in his grasp. So the Hawthorne kind of thought Emerson was too mystical, that he might be interested in natural facts, but ultimately in describing these facts, they become kind of misty and unsubstantial. So these two men were quite different in terms of disposition. another way of contextualizing the relationship. Um, Hawthorne, as you know, if you've read House of Seven Gables, Scarlet Letter, was very interested in the New England past, but ultimately interested in the idea that any past so thoroughly shapes and imbues the present that the present can't really be called the present, but simply a repetition of the past. House of the Seven Gables is about how a supposed curse from Matthew Mall on uh, Colonel Pynchon lived on century after century after century. Uh, the, the, the House of the Seven Gables, inhabited by the Pynchon, is basically a haunted house. It's a house haunted by a misdeed, a sin, we might say, of a distant relative. But that sin, that misdeed, pervades the house up to the present, and it pervades the bloodline up to the present. The sins of the fathers are visited upon the children, not just to the third and fourth generations, but infinitely, it seems. So Hawthorne seems to think that we, no matter what level our wit and imagination, are ultimately shaped by the past. We are constrained by the past. We are haunted by the past. Any notion that we can somehow fundamentally change ourselves from our past influences is folly. In her wonderful biography of Hawthorne, Brenda Wineapple points out that Hawthorne's story, The Birthmark, is an exact affront to Emerson's hope that we can embrace the present and that we can reform the present to a brighter future. In this story, Almayer, a scientist, is upset by his wife Georgiana's birthmark, a small mark on her face, and she agrees to let him remove it. He thinks she'll be perfect then. But just when he removes this birthmark, she dies. And our narrator says, "Our creative mother, while she amuses us with apparently working in the broadest sunshine, is yet severely careful to keep her own secrets, and, in spite of her pretended openness, shows us nothing but results. She permits us indeed to mar, but seldom to mend, and like a jealous patentee, on no account to make." So here is Hawthorne's narrator in The Birthmark saying that Mother Nature does not allow us to create fresh things. She does not allow us to mend what is wrong with her. And when we do try to mend what is wrong with her, we end up making things worse. So Emerson would not think this. So this takes us to House of the Seven Gables, which on the surface is a novel about breaking the patterns of the past. Phoebe, young, vivacious, full of life, comes into the Pynchon household, the House of the Seven Gables, and brings new life to it, helps revitalize Hepzibah and Clifford and the garden. And ultimately, she and Hallgrave fall in love. Who's Hallgrave? He's a reformer. He is a socialist. He is a mesmerist. He is a daguerreotypist. He is a writer. But ultimately, he loves change for the sake of change. He hates the past. The past is dead. Why pay attention to it? We don't have to. There's newness afoot. Let's be open to the present and the future. And he and Phoebe get married. Or, well, they fall in love. They're going to get married. And they're going to move out of the house. Phoebe's going to move out of the House of the Seven Gables. And Hepzibah and Clifford are going to move out of the House of the Seven Gables. So there's a sense that the dark pattern of the past is going to be broken. Should add that Hallgrave is a descendant of Matthew Mall, who is the ostensible wizard who cursed Colonel Pynchon all those years ago when Colonel Pynchon took his land away. So these two old households, long at odds, are now going to be reconciled, unified, and two young people, both filled with life and hope, are going to make a new start in a new place. It seems like a very Emersonian narrative. But in chapter where he describes the daguerreotypist Holgrave. Our narrator says this: Holgrave's career it would be difficult to prefigure. There appeared to be qualities in Holgrave, such as, in a country where everything is free to the hand that can grasp it, could hardly fail to put some of the world's prizes within his reach. But these matters are delightfully uncertain. At almost every step in life, we meet with young men of just about Holgrave's age, for whom we anticipate wonderful things, but of whom, even after much and careful inquiry, we never happen to hear another word. The effervescence of youth and passion and the fresh gloss of the intellect and imagination endow them with a false brilliancy, which makes fools of themselves and other people. Like certain chintzes, calicos, and ginghams, they show finely in their first newness, but cannot stand the sun and rain, and assume a very sober aspect after washing day. So men like Holgrave appear shiny and new and full of possibility when they are young, and people think, oh, what wonderful things will he do? But after they've been tumbled around in the washing cycles of time, that newness wears off and they look weathered and drab. Suggestion being that ultimately time will wear us down and that time's patterns will persist. We learn that even though Phoebe and Holgrave will not be living in the house of Seven Gables, they will live in a house that Holgrave does become more conservative, wanting to conform to the standards of mainstream society, have a wife, have a family. So his impulses to reform seem to have gone away. Will he establish new patterns? Will he repeat old patterns? Very likely, based on this passage. But moreover, the narrator ends the novel by showing Uncle Venner walk out of the house of the Seven Gables, closed, and hearing the harpsichord of the ghost, ostensibly, of Alice Pynchon playing her harpsichord. But the very last words we see are House of the Seven Gables. Alice, I'll just read it. And wise Uncle Venner, passing slowly from the ruinous porch, seemed to hear a strain of music and fancied that sweet Alice Pynchon, after witnessing these deeds, this bygone woe, and this present happiness of her kindred mortals, had given one farewell touch of a spirit's joy upon her harpsichord, and she floated heavenward from the house of the Seven Gables. So even though there's this feeling of the woes are now gone, a ghost haunting the house is being freed to heaven, the fact that Hawthorne ends the novel with the house of the Seven Gables written in all caps and an exclamation mark suggests that the novel ends where it begins. I mean, we begin with the description of the house of the Seven Gables. It's put right in front of our face. And we end by the house of the Seven Gables being put right in front of our face. So even if it's now empty, and even if now it seems to be dispossessed, exorcised of all its ghost, why does Hawthorne's narrator decide to end the novel by putting that house right in front of us? It suggests that the novel is not linear. It's not one of progress, one of development, from age to youth, from old to new. Instead, it's a circle, that we begin where we end, and that all of this hope is illusory, and that we can only imagine that before long, the Phoebe and Holgrave will fall into the same patterns that their ancestors did. There's nothing new under the sun, this novel seems to say. Although again, it dramatizes this tension between the possibility for newness and redemption and the idea that there is never anything new under the sun, and that to desire redemption is foolish. Why then, we might ask, does the narrator suggest that newness wins out over oldness, only in the end to suggest that no, the oldness is always there? Well, I feel like probably Hawthorne is trying to dramatize the Emersonian view versus his more Hawthornian view. But in some ways, he's doing Emerson in reverse. Emerson's Fate in reverse. Whereas Fate, 1860, starts out with things are terrible, but oh my gosh, look closely, we really have power as humans to push against fate. Hawthorne in The House of the Seven Gables, 1851, pushes as the novel unfolds to the idea, oh, things are getting better, things are newer, things are fresher, things are going to be reformed, and there's hope for the future. No, not really. There will always be a House of the Seven Gables, if not literally and figuratively. Um, so the newness is pushed back, and we end with the house, dark, dreary, with which we began.